Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Positive Life Answers podcast. This is Dr. Ann Mercer. You can call me Dr. Mary, as many people do. And I'm really, really thrilled today to continue my talk with Andrew. This is episode 19, and we'll just call it part 2, Awaken to Your True Self. You probably wonder what that means, so we're going to go into that. Awaken to Your True Self, How to Get Unstuck. So please, and this amazing book, I gave all the details of Andrew in episode 18, but his book is amazing. I've read it. And it's kind of a book that I'll revisit because you can't get everything. Your conscious mind can't receive everything in that first reading. It's great. You have a beautiful talent in taking this concept of movement therapy and feedback and teaching it in a clear manner. So we're going to go into more of that today. So I'm really excited about that. So please give episode 18 a listen to. They'll lay the foundations for our discussions today. So welcome again, Andrew.
Thanks for having me again. It's been a while.
That's for sure. And yes, everyone, we are here together. So let's go into, we were talking in part 1 about stories and stories that keep people stuck. And you're talking about that and just stopping. You know, a lot of people have not gotten permission to stay stuck. And as my background as a psychologist, I can say psychologists don't tell people to stop, but it's the number one effective way to make changes in your life. I can say that because I'm a psychologist. Okay. I have found so many things in my journey. We talked about Andrew's journey. You've heard about my journey and the Victoria's story, and ways that we both were stuck, all the different genres and modalities that we've used. Andrew and I met via our common mentor, and Andrew has taken that work and has just brought it to new levels. So welcome, and please tell us more about how you do anything is how you do everything.
Thanks for having me again.
No, of course. There's so much here. It'd be silly not to go into a part 2.
Well, what do you want to know? You specifically, what is helpful for you specifically? This is part 2, so we're going to go
are we making this about me?
No, just, what for yourself, I mean, what would help you? Because you said you read the book, and
yes.
And what's, is there anything in there that you had more questions on, or that you want to go deeper into that, of course, would be relevant and helpful for people?
Being a psychologist in the past and moving into this kind of work, I heard so much about victim mentality, but I think what you wrote in your book makes it more clear. So can you talk a little bit about how you observe the victim mentality and how you move people through that? I call it agony anchors as well, in people moving out of that victim mentality. So can you explain a little more about that? That's my first question.
Yeah, so I just call it victimhood, being a victim. That's just much easier to say than victim mentality every single time. But the reason is because there are victims to crimes and terrible things that happen to people, and that's real. So we want to acknowledge that terrible or semi-terrible or just things happen to people, and they're not to blame. Now, there's also people who live their life or parts of their life from the energy of being a victim, from this mentality that life happens to them, and they're innocent, and they've done nothing, and all of these terrible things happen to poor them.
Okay.
That's the victim mentality, where everyone else is responsible and to blame except them. And that's a very different way of living than just, when I was 3 years old, something bad happened to me. Yes, that child was a victim of something terrible. but how are they going to live their life? And when you're an adult and when you have much more conscious control of things in your life, how are you responsible? How did you show up to get somebody to treat you in a certain way? And again, doesn't mean if you're walking in a mall and there's a bomb or, you didn't get that person to do it. But in your everyday normal lives, when you're interacting with people and how you see the world, are you blaming other people? Or are you taking responsibility for what you've attracted and brought into your world based off of your choices, based off of the way that you see the world and show up? Like in part 1, we talked about the mechanic, screwed up.
Okay.
If we go from that example of your car broke down because the mechanic didn't do it correctly, and in there is talking about stories, right? Of, oh, well, he was a foreigner and you can't trust people, all of this stuff like that.
Okay.
Well, if that person has lived their life as a victim to that story, they're going to keep recreating circumstances that validate that story. And then they can continue to say, oh, poor me, I'm a victim. They continue to create a reinforcement loop that proves their story correct. And that person is a victim. They're a victim not only to what's happened, but to their own stories. Those stories foster and continue and perpetuate their suffering.
Got it. Got it.
It's
there.
a big pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are used to blaming everyone and everything for their problems, to start saying, hey, you know what? Maybe it's you. For a lot of people, they get angry. They don't like it. But for anybody that does that and takes an earnest look to see how they've responded or created these circumstances and make new choices and penetrate that, everything in their life changes. They're no longer in the victim mentality, and they're now choosing their destiny. Now they're the cause to their life rather than at the effect of life.
What do you do when they say to you, well, it's not my fault, Andrew?
My clients don't say that anymore.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I guess imagine some of the listeners saying,
Yeah,
well, it's not my fault that,
yeah.
that
Well,
people were mean to me during my life. What do we do with that?
Well, I say, well, what if it was?
Ah,
It's not. Okay, maybe it's not. What if it was?
okay.
How could you have shown up in the world to get those people to bully you, to make fun of? I'll go with my own story. I'll share from my own experience.
Okay.
Because this is one of the biggest things I struggled with in my own life, was being a victim. The victim chapter and the narcissism chapter are two of the most triggering chapters for many people to read. I have reviews of people that stop at those chapters and say, F this book, this guy's a blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Well, why? It's not because I'm wrong or I'm a jerk. It's because they're triggered. It's because they're being confronted with taking responsibility for looking at themselves to see what they're not all responsible. Other people are still responsible. So the important thing here to understand with this is that it's not about blaming other people, but it's also not about blaming ourselves.
Okay.
So taking responsibility is not the same thing as self-blame. And so let me back up. Let me finish the story because I got all worked
please
up.
do. And I have a question on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got all worked up about my tangent.
Yeah.
So when I was young, I had warts on my fingers, and I was bullied and teased because of that.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was poor me. I was like, I didn't know there's anything wrong with this. This is just my hands. I'm just a ball of love. And people were afraid of me. They made fun of me. They called me names. They did all this stuff. And it was traumatizing. And it was awful. I remember being in the playground and being in the classrooms in first and second grade, and people like being scared to touch me. And at the time, and for the next 10 years of my life during school, I was a victim to that. I was poor me. I took it all personally and gave it meaning. I didn't know that.
Mhm.
In retrospect, so through that whole time, I was the victim. All these bullying, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just a sweet little kid with warts, and they're just mean. Well, after doing a lot of work and a lot of deep diving and willingness to see and tell the truth, I said, oh, well, I didn't necessarily choose to have warts. It's not like that was a choice.
Right.
But I did choose to feel sorry for myself. I did choose to make it mean something about myself. I did choose to indulge in it. I did choose to go and use it to get more pity from my parents to feel sorry for me. I did choose to not have fun with it. And I did choose to be reactive to the bullying. I did choose to not stand up for myself. So it's like, oh, I wasn't as much of a victim as I thought I was. And then I went through each of those and said, well, what if I did all of those different? What if I made the opposite choices? It's like, well, if I stood up for myself, if I didn't take it personally, if I didn't feel sorry for myself and poor me, and I went through the whole thing and I'm like, oh my God, if I actually did all those things, it would have been nothing. Like none of that trauma would have happened. It just completely redefined my experience. And I said, oh my God, I wasn't a victim. Yes, these people did things. They said not nice things, and they're responsible for that. And I was responsible for how I responded. I was responsible for me being annoying. I was responsible for my part. And from there, I realized, oh my God, I'm not a victim. There are no victims. We make the choice to give things meaning, to take things personally, to blame and point fingers. And again, this is what I was talking about, the blame.
Right.
Blaming ourselves is not taking responsibility either. That's not the fix. It's still blame. You're still a victim, but you're a victim to your own behaviors and to your own self. That doesn't lead anywhere. It's responsibility. It's responsibility that says, oh, I own this. This is mine. Well, now that it's mine and I own it, I can do something about it. If it's somebody else's, you can't do about it. You can't go over and, change your neighbor's house because you want to. It's theirs. It's their property. You can't do that. You can't change anybody else, but you can change yourself. You can make new choices. And that comes through tremendous courage and a willingness to start taking responsibility, to start looking at yourself in a way that you're at cause for the results in your life rather than a bag being blown around by the wind of life.
There's so many lessons in this last example. It's like my head is going, wow. And I think one of the biggest ones was that you explained things that just felt so good about it's your reaction to what's happened to you. And that was another way to get to the point of taking responsibility, but it felt gentle and it felt good that, okay, how I react to these things is just going to keep the cycle going. And I thought it's just a really important thing you said. I just want to amplify here. And it's a choice.
Yep. We can't control the world, but we can control how we respond to it.
And that's the real key I want to emphasize to everyone is we have choices. And I think sometimes we haven't been told that we have choices.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't. Yep.
I wasn't either. Part of my story was I was in a slow learning group in grammar school because I had learning problems. So at that time, they called it the slow learner group. So there was a slow learner group. There was a middle group that was, they needed help. But then there were the smart kids, and the smart kids really nailed us dumb kids, they called it. And I was stuck in that for like 8 years until I got into high school, until a teacher took interest in me and empowered me by saying, there are ways to work around this. You can learn in different ways, and just took some time to be a role model and meet with me that took me out of that stupid mentality. And I didn't know I could do that until my senior year of high school. So what I'm trying to say here, it's never too late. It's just never too late to make this kind of shift in your life. And I think what Andrew and I are saying is that, yeah, it takes courage to do this. You'll hear things that you don't want to hear, but then it'll sink into your heart, and it's the truth. And Andrew is speaking the truth, and he writes about the truth. And one of the other truths that I thought was really interesting is this kind of learning how to live, giving permission that it's okay to cut loose all this baggage and enjoy your life or live. And it's kind of what we said a little bit before about just stopping. So could you just tell me a little more about that? So
Well, I want to talk a little bit about. I don't want to talk a little bit about you, actually.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we first met, just
Yes.
how, I say this in the most loving way, uptight
Absolutely.
you were.
Yeah, anxiety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anxiety,
I had a
frozen.
story of anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember it's like you just wanting to do it right, and you're just kind of trapped in this kind of like not puritanical, but just this kind of stuffy, just like
Mhm.
neutered, stuffy kind of thing. And then I remember I don't know if this is really what happened, but this is how I imagine it in my memory.
Yeah, let's see.
It was around doing it wrong. It's like wanting to do it right and all this stuff so much. And it was like, just go and throw some water balloons at people.
Yes, you're right. That was it.
Okay, it was good.
Memory. I'm impressed.
Yeah. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, we're just so... Now, to the normal person, if you said just go throw water balloons at people, it's probably not the best advice. But for this situation, for this story, for this myth that was binding you, it's like, let loose. Just go and live. All right, throw water balloons at people. Okay, you might get yelled at, you might get in trouble, maybe a ticket or something. But if that's what it takes to break out of this stuffed shirt of a life, are you willing to do whatever it takes? And so for that instance, I was like, oh, because when I heard it, it was like, ooh, that sounds fun. And then immediately it was like, oh my God, I might get somebody upset. What if I throw it at the guy and he wants to come beat me up? It was like, all these stories start coming up. And it's those stories that bind us. It's that stories that keep us stuck and small. So
that's interesting. I was gravitated to that one little chapter in your book about starting to live. And it was that feedback that started to put through. I mean, there were other layers of stuff, but it was the first step.
Did you end up going throwing water balloons?
Go out and mess it up, Mary, is what you guys said. It's like, yeah, I mean, I had this, what you call it, inflated ego. I'm successful. I've been on Oprah. I haven't had a market for years because I was on Oprah. I was getting all this clients and making a ton of money, but was I happy? No. I was
were you alive?
Was I alive? No. It's very robotic, and it's much different these days from the work that you do. So I think it's great to share that story with everyone, into a great example.
Well, thanks for letting me share it. Yeah, it sticks in my memory. It's like,
oh, wow. It's like, no, I understand myself even today. Yeah. But one thing you said too, and I was really caught up into The Secret. And just at the end of the last hour, we talked about how people stay stuck in The Secret, and don't get into this level of work. So can we pick that up too? Because I remember I saw the movie, I read the book, I was just practicing this and that, but not going deeper into really what's in my heart. So that was another layer for me to go through as well until we got our work together.
So what the big thing I learned with that is that they only take you so far, right? Everything is about thinking. The really good stuff touches into feeling, but it's more like feel it tangibly, or build up your state feeling. There's one problem I have with the law of attraction and the way it's taught. I don't think it's how it is necessarily, but with how it's taught, it's basically you avoid negative feeling
Oh,
or negative anything at all costs. And it's like if only you think of the positive, only your life will be good. And it's a complete distortion of reality, and it's a complete distortion about feeling. It's not about feeling good all of the time. It's about feeling all of the time.
well said. Well
Yeah.
said. That is a key difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not just seeking out bliss and ecstasy all of the time. That gets boring. I mean, I love sex, I love bliss, I love pleasure, I love ecstasy,
Hmm.
but you can't do it 24/7 for 80 years. I mean, you die way before then because you're not eating. It's just walking. So it's not the reality. However, you can walk around in joy and peace. You can walk around as that being your baseline. You
Okay.
can walk around where something terrible happens and it's no longer a terrible thing that's happening and you're reactive to it and it takes you out and you're miserable.
Hmm.
But it's about feeling. And so one of the things that happens is that let's say you want to manifest more money or a partner. Well, if you're suppressing all of the trauma and negative feelings, that stuff is still there. It's still running you. And so you're going to keep coming face to face with all that stuff until you feel it, until you deal with it. So
Oh,
it's not about dwelling. So most people when they hear this stuff, they're miserable, they're suffering, they're dwelling in the agony, they're being negative and pessimistic. That doesn't work. But neither does skipping and bypassing and avoiding the shadow.
yes.
That doesn't work either. And so that's a really big piece that's missing is the integration and
Oh,
relationship with the shadow, how that has a huge part to play in actually law of attraction and manifesting. Because guess what? That shadow stuff is still there. And that shadow stuff has the attractor point. That's law of attraction going on. Even though you're ignoring it and suppressing it, it's still there and it's running the show because you're avoiding it and you're not getting into relationship with it. So whatever you're out of relationship with in your shadow runs you.
the
And
shadow is
that's
very important. Those
yes.
shadow material, again, these stories that we still carry with us and parts of us that we disown, but we need to get to know and make peace with it. Is that what you're saying? And use that
Well,
to
yeah, well it's
understand
like
where you're at.
well yeah, if part of our shadow is the part of us that thinks, we're ugly and undeserving and lovable,
Oh, okay.
then guess what happens when you try to attract your perfect mate? Well, you're probably going to attract
Oh,
one that validates that story,
got it.
or you end up self-sabotaging and taking yourself out. So that stuff in there is much more of an attraction point, has much more energy to it than just one thought a day of I want a happy person in my life.
Yeah, it's not going
Yeah,
to cut it. So you're just going
it's
to keep repeating the
yeah,
patterns.
yeah,
In other
exactly.
words.
Until you break it, until you feel it, until you penetrate it, until you go inside and actually start healing it.
And to
And that
get to that, the movement, like
exactly.
for exactly the slack line or the simple movement really cuts through that, and you can see that. I remember there was a story I was running. I got on a slack line, and you can see that I was carrying this energetic alligator on my hip that just contained the stories that I was suppressing. It sounds
Yep.
weird to say that to everyone, but just getting on the slack line, you drop out of ego, you drop in your body, and you start showing everyone all those stored stories that are stuck in you. And I think I'd like you to pick up on that because I want people now to really understand a little bit more of your work so they can understand the benefits of what they can do with you with the movement feedback diagnostics. So
Yeah,
take that
so
away.
yeah.
What I want to finish on today.
So cinesomatics, again, the breakdown just from the word cine as in video and movement, and somatics of the body. So we use movement and video and give you feedback about how you're showing up in the body.
Okay.
Because the way you're showing up in your body is the way you're showing up in your life, in the world.
Got it.
And so one of the things that we do, as you mentioned earlier, one of these further places I'm taking the work is through somatic archetypes. And what I discovered is that, as you know, in psychology, we have something called IRs, internal representations. So
Okay.
I say, think of an elephant, think of a pizza. And there's a smell, a picture, a word, a thought. This comes to your mind. When you hear pizza or elephant, this image, the sound, whatever it is, comes to you. That's how you represent that thing.
All right.
So you have that for yourself. You have that for how to make money, how to relate to people, whatever. Now, what I discovered is that the body has its own representation. There is a separate somatic representation of these concepts and these archetypes. And if that matches what's in your mind, your internal representation, if that feeling is congruent, well, then the results you think you're going to get in your life are the ones you get. It doesn't mean they're functional. It doesn't mean it's helpful or not. It just means it's congruent. Whereas if I say, are you a loving person? And you say, yes. And I say, all right, well, show me being loving. And you go like this. That's how your body thinks, represents being loving. Now I say, okay, for a properly wired person, you would see that and say, that actually looks like you're beating the crap out of something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you're punching something. But for someone who has the same somatic representation, they'll probably say something like, oh, this is tough love.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That hit me in the eye. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's something that we could call reverse wiring.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, where somebody in their mind thinks they're doing one thing, but in their body and the results they're getting, the exact opposite. And you can only discover this stuff through the body.
Yes.
Because these somatic representations, as I said earlier, these are the things that actually relate to your manifestations in the world. Your body is what's in time and space. So how you show up in your body is how you're showing up in the world and the results you're getting, not just what you think about in your head. That plays a part, but it's not the end all be all. Your thoughts about yourself aren't the end. It's the embodiment of how you see yourself, because that's what's going to create the results. So having the movement and having the feedback helps you discover the reality of what you're actually doing. If you think you're a nice person and say, all right, show me nice, and you're doing this, well, maybe it looks manipulative. Maybe it looks untrustworthy. And then you wonder why everybody in your life manipulates you. Well, there's your answer. It happens like that. I can see it in seconds. Whereas a traditional therapist or coach, it would take weeks or months, even years, maybe, to find some of these things out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's
Those are really nice, clear
powerful
examples. Very nice, clear examples. And embodiment means feeling it in your body. Is that what you mean by embodiment?
Embodiment is that wisdom is found literally within your body.
Okay.
So it's more than a feeling. It's the expression of it. It's the home of it. Where do you store it? Do you store the concept in your head, or do you store it in your flesh? And when it's in your flesh, that's what people see. If you think you're a confident person and then you walk around like this all the time, what's the reality? This, not your image.
Exactly. Big disconnect there.
Big disconnect. And it's why a lot of people struggle. They're like, I've been trying to do this stuff for 30 years. I don't know why it's not working. Well, show me. I tell them in minutes and seconds. And so people that have been doing self-help work for decades. I have people that come in, they're 70, 80 years old and say, I've been doing this for 60 years. I've seen everything. They
Oh
come
my
in and do
gosh.
this. They come in and do this. They're blown away. They're like, I've never seen this before. And a lot of them can't handle it because
Yeah.
they're used to 60 years of being enabled and codependent. And they're not used to somebody actually telling them the truth and seeing their shadow through the body and having proof on video of it. So it
Yeah.
is very confronting, but it does work when nothing else does.
It does. And when I saw myself, I could see it as well after it was pointed out. It's like, oh my gosh, there was such a disconnect between this, ego of, I am popular, I'm on Oprah, I'm successful, I bought $1 million house versus how I felt inside. It was like two different worlds. And now they're come together. So
And
this
you're
work
now,
is amazing.
and now your life is even better now that they're coming
Oh,
together.
I can't imagine living, and I know it's a judgment, but if I look back to 6 years ago to now, it's such a shift. So, yeah,
Yeah,
right. So
yeah.
you do this one-on-one, and you do this in a small, intimate Slackline, and
Groups.
yeah,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
do
We
it
have a.
in? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Do you do
No,
it
no, go
otherwise?
ahead.
Yeah, Slackline one-on-one. Do you still do the small groups of just movement?
Oh yeah, we do everything. I mean, I do symbolism work as well, where we use ancient
Okay.
imagery to help people get these reference points that they were never taught. And so imagine being grown
Mm,
up without a mother, without a father. Well, you probably didn't get that reference point of masculinity or femininity from a very functional place. And so there's these images, there's these ancient pictorial archetypes that help us get into relationship and get those archetypes embodied in ourselves. So we do that. We do dream work.
okay.
The advanced students, we get into maybe more of the hands-on, energetic stuff. And so, yeah, I work one-on-one. My private practice right now is full, which I'm very blessed. So there's a wait list for that.
That's
And so we're going to
amazing.
be,
I'm
yeah,
so
so
glad you're reaching out and people are really benefiting, and it's great to hear that.
yeah, I mean,
You're
you
going
can
to
see,
change so many people, and it's going to create a wonderful domino effect. Mhm.
yeah, it rippling out, because each of these
Yes,
people are going to show up in their lives in a new way.
yes,
And they're not necessarily teaching it, but how they show up in the world does teach it. It does inspire. It does
yeah.
influence. So, getting this book out there, we do group workshops, retreats, private events and corporations,
Okay.
um, all sorts of stuff. Couples work is really fun and intense. We have certain diagnostics where couples move together and do stuff,
Oh,
and
yes, yes.
people that have been struggling in their relationships or marriages for years or decades, in seconds and minutes, I can show you exactly why and what's happening and what to do about it. And you have proof on video as evidence. It's not some esoteric guru in robes spouting stuff that you have to blindly trust. It's real world evidence on video. You get to see it in yourself, in your own body, and see it reflected in your relationships, in your bank accounts, in your body. And then you have the opportunity to make new choices and move in new ways.
And can you hold up your book one more time?
Of course
And
I can.
pick up this book, everyone, read it. Now, it's going to be a lot, and you're going to have to read it maybe 2, 3 times until you just absorb everything, awaken to the true self, how to get unstuck. It's just an amazing book. It might be your first step, or your first step might just be, call and get on that wait list. And
Yeah,
during that wait list time, read the book.
yeah,
Listen to the book.
yeah, we have assessments too. So these are good for people that
Oh,
just, yeah, a good starting point. So it's an embodiment assessment. It's a 2-hour call over Zoom,
okay.
and we just
That's
have you
good to
do a
know.
little movement, and through
Like
that
a little
movement,
intro.
yeah,
That's fantastic.
yeah, we do some movement, some handshaking, some things like this, and we get a read on the primary myths that are running you. What are the
Yes.
things
Start.
that if they're showing up on this first call, the first time I'm meeting you, and they're
Mhm.
everywhere on this call, they're everywhere in your life.
Got it.
And
Mhm.
It's as it was for me, it is for many people a turning point in their lives, because this work isn't about fixing. It's not coming in and me fixing you. It's about a completely new way of living, a completely new way of moving through the world.
It
Out of
is.
the head, in the
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. It is about living and enjoying life. And all the information will be in the show notes for Andrew's website, contact information, as well as mine. So please, as you listen to this, if you have any questions, as you have for me, please reach out and ask your questions, and
Yeah.
also give some feedback for us.
AndrewDaniel.org is my
Yes.
website, and you can contact me there, schedule a session, or get my book.
Great. And if you didn't get that, it'll be in the notes, and there'll be links. So it'll be really easy to get a hold of Andrew. So thank you. There's so much we covered, and there's so much more to cover. So I'm hoping in the future soon we can team up again and we can even dive a little further into this. But thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your teachings. You're
welcome.
making big shifts in this world, and that's amazing. So everyone have a fantastic week. Make it a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Are you sure you want to stop, Clara?